Hello, Mastertron Tamer here. We're going to be learning how to splice wires together in this video. What got me thinking about this idea was in one of our last videos I had mentioned that the company that provided the USB cord had given us these neat little connectors for putting things together. And I played around with them and they work pretty good, but ideally what we want is something a little more permanent than that, and something that will be less resistance, and we'll be talking about that coming up. So we're going to learn some of the better ways to splice things together. So let's go ahead, and we may have more than one video on this because there's so many different ways to do it. But let's start with something that I think anybody who works with wiring should know about. And that's called a Western Union splice. This is the splice that they used on the original telegraph routes, which is why it's got that name. Let me go ahead and get a couple of things prepped here real quick. All right. Now I got everything I want. So let me show you this one. It's simplistically, it's very simplistic in how it works, but it actually works really good. So here I've twisted the multi-strands together, and I've done this on the other side too. So now I've got two approximately equal length wires. Then the next step is to bend it at a right angle. So I'll do that on the other one. All right. And now we simply cross them over. And the goal here is that we're going to twist them onto the other wire, going around like this. And then the one on the other side simply goes the other way. So this has made, I can't pull that apart. And that was the origin of why they spliced it this way. These were on wires on telegraph poles that might get pulled, and they needed something that was both electrically solid and physically solid. All good splices start with a good physical connection, and that's what we've got here. So let's see if this is a very good electrical connection. And this is actually really easy to test. Let's see if we're on resistance, and we are. So what I'm going to do is take an equal length of wire, and I'm using alligator clips on the ends because that'll be a little bit more stable, and then we'll see what it comes up with. Well, this meter is reading 0 ohms. It was kind of showing 0.1 ohms for the minute there. Let's see what this Western Union splice reads. Zero ohms. So that's great. That's a good splice. That's making really good, and we haven't introduced a lot of resistance by making that splice. Now, if we really wanted to measure that, we would need a more higher end meter that could measure very small amounts of resistance. One that a consumer can buy typically doesn't. But just kind of a rule of thumb is if you can get down to about the same resistance reading that you're getting with a straight piece of wire, you've done a good job. Let's go ahead and disconnect that and show you how we could take this to the next level. So we already know we have a good mechanical connection. Now let's go ahead and make it an even better electrical connection. And it's super simple at this point. Now I deliberately use pre-tinned wire, so this is going to be even easier. I'm going to heat it up and then just solder it. Let that cool for just a moment. And at this point, we've got a connection that would be difficult to even read the resistance across, because we've made it good mechanically, and now we could put solder in there, which has gone in and filled in all the little nooks and crannies between the strands and the two things that we've created. One of the issues with getting a good connection is that wires aren't square, they're round. And even the stranded wire is made up of multiple round things. Well, if we're just going to pinch it on both sides, we're not really connecting on much of that round shape. We're just doing little tiny bits of that circle. So that's one of the things that the solder helps with. All right, now to truly make this one that I would be happy with, because I like to have them a certain way, we would put heat shrink on it. And I've got a nice kit here. I would be happy to share how you can get a hold of this. Now this is high-end heat shrink. You want to get heat shrink with at least a 3-to-1 shrink ratio. And if it's going to be used in any kind of environment where it's going to deal with water or be physically tugged on or anything like that, then you want something that's sometimes called marine heat shrink. But what it is, it's heat shrink where on the inside there is a thin coating of effectively hot glue. So we can just slide that over our connection. And another trick is, if you're trying to get this even, I always put my thumb kind of sizing up where this will land, so that when I slide it over, I know that I've got it on the insulation on both sides. Then we just need to heat shrink it. Now, it's probably hard for you to see that with the camera, but a small amount of glue has started to ooze out of each end of the heat shrink. And that's how we know that we have it done. And when this cools down, this will be it will be at least as strong as the original wire when tugging it. And it's also going to have a resistance that we probably can't even measure, like I said, without a special meter. So let's do that just to be sure. There's nothing wrong with double checking our work. Yeah. So it's measuring no resistance, but like I said, there is some. It's just very tiny. So that would be a near perfect one to use at that point. All right. Let's move on to some other ways of doing this. So that's a good option, and that worked really well. Let's talk about the various ways of crimping things together. So to start with, let's see, let me put these out of the way a little bit because I want you to be able to see here. Let me tell you my least favorite way of splicing. That's with something called a butt connector. And a butt connector, the way it works is we slide the wires in from each side, And then this is just a small copper tube with tinning on it typically, and we just crimp that as hard as we can. The problem with this, in my opinion, is that it doesn't have enough contact with the wire. And it's very common that the wire will just pull out at some point, or that moisture will get in it, and that will cause problem at some point. So again, this is one of my least favorite ways of splicing, but unfortunately it's one of the most popular. Let's talk about some other options. So here I've got a crimp tool, a crimp connection, but this one is completely different than a butt connection. Well, first of all, there's no insulator on it, but we can put heat shrink over it. We don't need an insulator. This is completely different. This type of connector, what's going to happen is it's going to fold over the metal on top of the wire in kind of a heart shape and folds it actually into it. And this makes one of the best connections that you can do short of soldering. Now, you can't crimp it with a regular crimper. You need a special crimper which is designed for these terminals. It can be identified by the heart shape that it's going to crimp. So the way this is going to work is we're going to crimp the inner one with one size, and then this outer one is for the insulation. So let's go ahead. I should have another one set up here that we can use to do this with. All right, so let's make another connection. All right, so these ones are a little trickier. The wire lays in it like this, and then with the crimp tool, one of the sides of the crimp tool, again, that's probably hard for you to see, but it's got it looks like a little pointy bit. The pointy bit goes towards the top here where we want to fold it. And I'm going to go ahead and pick the one for the wire gauge I'm working with, which should be this one. And make sure. Yeah. And I just slide it in there. And then make sure I've got a good solid crimp. And again, what this has done is it's folded over on top of the wire. I think there's nothing wrong with giving it another go, just to be absolutely sure. And again, you can't pull this out of here. And the big advantage of this is that it's got all these contact areas with all of the strands of the wire. Like I said, it's literally folded into it. And this is the type of connection that would be used, say, in an automobile or a plane or anywhere where there's vibration. And that would be a good solid connection. Let me go ahead. I'm going to cut this. And then I'll lay in the other one. We'll pretend this is the other wire coming in from the other side. And you can see I kind of twist it just a little before I put it in there. And this is working the best for me when I hold it like this. And then I can go ahead and I can crimp it, double checking that I have the right one. And voila, we've got a connection This is so much better than a butt connection for a couple of reasons, and I'll show you in a minute. But before we go any further, let's check the resistance and make sure that we have a good connection. Let's see, there it goes. Yeah. So my meter, like I said, not professional grade, but it can't read the resistance, so that's good. So now we've got a really good electrical connection. And we've got a really good mechanical connection. Everything is good about this. There are a couple more steps that we can actually do with this though. So there's nothing actually stopping us from putting a drop of solder in there. It's probably not needed if I have used pre-tinned wire, and this is a gold-plated connector, gold over copper typically, so it's probably not going to corrode either. But we could put a little drop of solder on there. That's one more step. Some of you have probably noticed these extra little ears on here. Those are for crimping around the wire. So typically what you do is you go the next size up on your crimping tool, sometimes two, but usually one will do it. And we put a crimp onto the insulation. Now we've got an even more mechanically strong connection. If we wanted to, we could slide a little piece of heat shrink over there and shrink it if we were worried about moisture getting in there. So, and even to give it a little bit more mechanical connection. Now, as you saw, that was a two-step process, the way I did it. I wanted to show it to you the way it would work, you know, with a crimper most people can afford. Obviously, I'll put a link for this one, as well as everything, so you can find it. They do make a more expensive crimper, and basically, this is twice as wide, at least, of the jaw, and each one of these is two sizes, one for the inner crimp and one for the insulation crimp. And the idea with that is that you can put it in there and just do one operation. This type of crimper is also designed where it won't let go until you've gone all the way down to guarantee you get it. So to use that type of a crimper, grab another one. It's actually a little tricky, so I wanted to show that to you, kind of the steps for doing that. All right, let's see, which size do I want? I think I want this one, the one in the middle. Well, nope, I'm changing my mind on that already. I want the one on the end. So these ones are a little trickier. So the part that's going to crimp on the wire, it goes in the wider side, and on this crimper, that's right here. And there are a lot of different ways you could do this, but I like to preset the connector in there. Then I slide it in so that I can see that I've got it to the right place for the insulation, and then crimp it. And because it's really tight, sometimes it doesn't want to come back out. But we'll get it out. There we go. So again, what's really cool about that tool is if you were doing a bunch of these, you could do them in one operation instead of two. Most of the crimping I'm doing isn't hundreds, it's dozens, and I like doing them individually so that I can see each one done. But there's no reason you couldn't get a hold of one of these, and like I said, I'll put a link in there so you can pick one up if you want. But just be aware, they are more money. Okay, so we've seen some really good crimping. We've seen how to do a Western Union splice. I'm going to be showing you some of my all-time favorite ways of splicing stuff together. Before I go there, I wanted to talk a little bit about mechanical connections as far as if you were not going to solder, let's say you didn't have a good crimping tool, what would be some of your other options? Well, I think that one that kind of stands out as the best is something called the Scotchlok crimp connection. So these connections, I'll bring them over here so that they're on this other thing. I've kind of pre-positioned them. They were originally created by the 3M company. That's why they're called Scotchlok connections. Well over 50 years ago. They were created for the phone industry, who need to put a lot of wires together and do it as quickly and efficiently as possible. And that's what they were created for. Now that they have been out for over 50 years, the patent is now open. So there are other companies making ones that are copies of them. I will try and put links for both. There is a little bit of a cost advantage. Getting the originals, I think there's an advantage there too. So again, this is a case where you wanted to put two wires together, you didn't have the option to solder, and you just needed to do it quickly. This would be a tool we could use. And as I was mentioning, I think of this as a much preferable, it's much more permanent than something like that. So let's do that. Let's see how they work and put a couple together. So I've actually got some thermostat wire here that I'll be using to go through some of the different ones that you can use. These are still the standard for data lines and the various CAT designations and all the rest. They still make a great connection. The way they work, I kind of wanted to show you. I've actually torn one apart, so hopefully you can see it. We'll zoom in as close as we can. Is it has little teeth in there on a tinned piece of metal that's going to go on both sides of the wire when the wire gets crimped in there. So the wire will be crimped in there. It will go on both sides of the wire, and then it does it twice, just to make sure we're going to get a good solid connection. So let's look at the different versions for doing this. Notice these orange ones, and I have these in two different sizes. So what the orange designates is that this is for two wires that we're going to put together. And you'll notice we have different sizes of red too here. And these are both 3 wires, but what's different is the size of the wire that they're designed to crimp. And let's go ahead and do the 3-wire one. So I'll put in one. Now, I cleaned it off of this one over here, but I'll pull this back out. Inside of here is a special kind of grease. And the purpose of that grease is to keep moisture out of the connection. It's not like a perfect thing. I mean, I wouldn't directly bury this, for instance, but it does really help keep moisture out. So they couldn't be simpler to use. You simply push them all the way in. You do not strip them first. And then you just crimp it down. Now, I have an inexpensive version of the right tool you're supposed to use for this. 3M made the correct tool. But this one will work. But let me give you another tip. Any good pair of pliers that's got like a slip joint in it, like a channel lock type of one, or even combination pliers will work almost as well for doing these. The idea is we just want to push down on it evenly. And I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so a little bit of the grease came out, and that's what's supposed to happen. That means the wire is got that grease coated all over it. And this is a very good mechanical connection. It's water resistant, and because it has this U shape here, it's got 4 different contact points on each wire. So we should have a really good connection, but let's check it so we know we have a good connection. Now, this is not pre-tinned wire. This is just regular old, like I said, thermostat wiring wire. I wanted to use something common that most people might have access to. So, let's do this one more time, and we should see now that all 3 of these wires are connected. So if I clip on here, this has kind of gone out of your line of view there. So and if I connect to either one of the others, I should see a very low resistance. Yeah, unmeasurable with this meter. Let's try the other one just to be sure. Yep. So, if you're going to do something, you don't have the right crimp tools, or you can't solder, this would be my first choice. Stay away from butt connectors. Don't like butt connectors. All right. Let's look at some other ones here. So you saw that we had a 2-wire version of it. That's just a little bit smaller because it only works with 2 wires. That's good. But let me show you an even cooler one. The green one here is a tap. And one side of this is got a slot in it. And the way that that is designed is so that we can slip it over an existing wire. Like say we're trying to do a power tap or something like that. We can slip it over an existing wire. I think I have one more of these. And then we can slip in the one that we want to come off of that. Yeah, this one's got a little bend on the end, so I'm a little nervous about that one. All right. Then we can slip in another wire. Just make sure it's gone all the way down. And now, off of the yellow wire, I have tapped the blue wire. Again, good and solid. And one other thing I probably should have mentioned more strongly, do make sure you get the wire pushed all the way in. You should be able to feel it bottom out, that it's gotten all the way to the end and it can't go any further. So that should also be a really good. And there's kind of grease everywhere, and that's normal. We could wrap it with electrical tape if we wanted to. Let's see what we've got resistance-wise between these 2 wires. Give it a moment. Yep, we've got a really good solid connection. So, again, if we're not going to solder, if we don't have the correct crimp tool, Scotchlok connectors are a really good option. And the moisture resistance, that would be good. One thing I would say is this type of connector isn't really designed for like a high vibration environment, things like that. But for most other uses, it's fantastic. So, wanted to show you those. so that you would know you had an option. You didn't have to get the rest of the stuff if you wanted. And I'll put some very expensive kits available on Amazon that even come with the pliers. So I'll put some links to those for you if you want to go that way. All right, so now I'm going to move on to showing you my favorite way of putting two wires together. Oh, yeah, no, I've got one more after that. Before I show you my favorite, let me show you yet another option that does not require you to solder and does not require you to have any tools other than some strippers and a heat gun. I'm going to grab one of the bigger ones of these so that you can hopefully see it better. So how these connectors work is that it's a piece of heat shrink. And the way it's supposed to work is that we put wires in from both sides, and then we heat shrink it. And this, what looks like metal in the middle, well, it is metal, is actually a low temperature melting solder. And it will solder the two wires together and do this all as one operation. It's still not my most favorite way, but it's not a bad option. And I think what we're going to find out when we do this is we're going to get an unmeasurable resistance, just like with the other example, once we've tried it. So let's go ahead and give this a try. So this one is for a very large diameter. The yellow probably signifies that this is for 10 gauge wire. What we want to do is pick the one that's just a little bigger than our wire so that we're sure it can slide through okay. And this looks like the one that I want. All right. So I'm going to put these two wires together, and let me show you the right way to do that. So I think if we were to go look up some instructions online, what it would tell us to do is to push it in so that each wire goes past the other. And then when we go to heat it, they'll be brought together by the heat shrink. The heat shrink's going to give us the mechanical connection we want, and then we heat it. I have a preferred way of doing these that I think is going to get us even a better connection. And in my case, I am using pre-tinned wire, so this is going to work really well. What I like to do is mush the two of them together, kind of like that. And then, oops, except I don't want to lose any of the strands. And then put it together again. It's clear for a reason, so that we can see that we've got the two metal parts of the wires together, and that we can see that we have the insulation. So let's go ahead and give this a go. Let me move this out of the way slightly, just enough so I can get this in the center here. Okay, I'm just double checking that I'm seeing the wire on both sides. And I'm going to put it on there, and I will see that little bead shrink. And I know then that I have melted that little bit of solder. And we just need to let that cool for a minute, and we should have a really good connection. I can see this better than you can, and I think I see the solder having actually flowed into the wire. But you know how we're going to check it. Good connection. Exactly what we wanted. So that is another option. It's a relatively new option. I like it because it actually solders the wires together. It gives a decent mechanical connection. The heat shrink is actually what's doing that for us once it's cooled. It does give some support to it, and it's insulated it. So that's not a bad option. And a kit like this with the different sizes is not very expensive. So I wanted you to see that and to see how you do that one properly. But we should see wire on each side of the little metal solder thing in the middle, and then we know that we've kind of pushed them to the right. And the insulation should be past these little indicators here. And then we know we've gotten a good connection. So that's not bad. That's a decent connection. All right. I think we are finally ready for me to show you my favorite connection. So in the same kit, and I will be putting a link in there for that. It's got, well, here, let me grab a bigger one so that you can see it better. These little copper U-looking things. These are designed to crimp two wires together and bring them together. But let me show you how we do that. May have to start reusing some of these. All right. I'm going to do a nice clean end here. Do that one. And do that one. Oh, and I don't want the biggest size. I want the small size. All right, so what am I going to do with this little U thing? I'm going to lay both wires in there on top of each other, similar to how we did it with the heat shrink connector, and then we're going to crimp over both of them. And what that's going to do is smush all these wires into each other and make a super solid connection. So let's go ahead and I'll get this pre-set up for the right size. Yeah, I think this one that says 1814 gauge is the one I want. And the little teeth, that's going to be the part that's going to go over it. So let me push this in here the right way. Oh, it went away from me. Let me do it this way then. There. It's finally kind of sit down where I want it in the crimper. Now I can put my wires in, one from each side. What I should have done is twisted this first. Alright, now I've got wires in there from both sides. And then I just crimp it. So the idea being that that smushes them together, but look, I did not get a good crimp on that. And that's because I probably have the wrong size. Sometimes we have to go back and take a look at our procedure. And I'm not as happy with that one as I would have been with a little bit smaller size for that wire. So what we can do is get a smaller size. And to do that, I'm going to take one of these and cut it down. Go ahead and put it in. Like that. Okay. And then we'll feed the wire in from both sides. Actually, I've got extra here I don't need, so I'm going to cut that off. All right. Put the wire in from both sides. Cut it in from that side. And then I'll put it in from the other side. And then go ahead and crimp it. And then I have got a really solid connection. And then for kind of the final touch on doing it this way, I'm going to go ahead and solder it. I'm doing this on a silicone mat. That's why I can do this. I'll put a link in there for that too. A little bit of solder. Let that cool. And you could see that was a little bit more work, but that is a perfect connection because they are on top of each other. They're pressed together. They're in a metal collar to give them a good mechanical connection, and it'll never come out. And of course the final step would be to put heat shrink over it, which will give it strain relief and keep the moisture out if we use the marine grade heat shrink. So that's my favorite way of doing that. As we discovered, it's important that we have the right size thing that we're going to crimp it into. And you find that out by testing it and seeing what works. Let's go ahead, do one more measurement. Oh yeah, 0. It just hadn't settled down. So yeah, we're good. We've got a good connection, and that will not come apart. All right, and you might be asking yourself, well, why wouldn't you just use one of these? I could have put a wire in both sides, crimped it, and even done a little bit of solder on it before I crimped the one over the insulation. So that's another way to go. If you wanted to do that. So you might be asking yourself, okay, I don't have those neat connections that you just showed me. What could I do with what I've got? Well, most people have played with these kind of connections before. And let me show you another option that you can do. So I'm going to go ahead and heat one of these up just a little bit, so I can pull it out of its insulation. Takes just a moment. It'll come out. There it goes. All right. Let me pull it off of there because I don't want to burn myself. There. Need to let that cool for just a second, or I will burn myself. Because I'm not after the ring terminal here. I'm after this little collar on the end. Is that cool enough to work with? Yeah, we're okay. And this is going to look very similar to what I did with the more fancy connector. I'm going to put it through from one side. Put it through from the other side. I did not twist that enough. And I flung it away. I thought I saw where it landed, but apparently I did not. So let's go ahead. We'll get one more. Oh, I just was able to pull that out. Didn't need the iron. I'll go ahead and cut that. I can put it through from one side. Then I'll put it through from the other side. Like thread the needle. In it goes. Okay. Once I've got it through from both sides, I could use any crimper I have available that could crimp these other terminals, but I could even do it with a good pair of pliers. And get a good mechanical connection. That's pretty good. Or, if I have them available, a crimper, and once I've got my good mechanical connection, I top it off with a little solder. Again, the solder is going to flow into all the nooks and crannies between the strands. I'm giving it a second so it can actually flow. Let that cool, and I've got a good connection. So these actually aren't very expensive if you want to get yourself a set of those, but if you've got just regular terminals that you can actually get at any auto parts store, any place that has those kind of things, you can use that to make a really good connection. Like I said, head and shoulders above a butt connection. But yeah, both of these are really good. Well, I think that gets us to where I wanted to go. We saw how to heat shrink them. We recommend that. We've seen the various ones. And I've tried to get some of the most popular ones out there, the ones that I think could help you the most in your endeavors of putting two pieces of wire together and getting good connections. So, like I said, if there are other ones that you want me to take a look at, please put that in the comments. I appreciate that. That will help me know which ones people are interested in. But like I said, I think I've hit the highlights here of all the best ways to connect wire. So if you have any questions, you want me to do any other ones, comments, don't forget to like. And I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you in our next video.